Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Van Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Huh? So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
Your favorite podcast, it's Critical Blast!
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
And I'm Scott Wakefield, host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham, where we talk about comic books and all kinds of great storytelling, sometimes with incredible guests. And we want you to join us Wednesday nights from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you there.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a Silverline Show on Tuesday, hosted by myself. I am Tim TK, associate editor, what's that, associate producer? Associate editor at Silverline, and producer of the Tuesday show. We're still figuring out the name, so if you have any suggestions, let us know in the comments on the VODs, or if you catch us live in the chat. And joining me as always and forever, Mr. Aaron and Mr. Quentin. This week we are talking about a bit of a craft style subject, how the sausage is made, and at some point we may actually talk about sausage. Yeah. Quentin,
Sausage.
Quentin's big on the sausage collectibles.
I'm gonna make some sausage. Everybody likes a sausage.
I think most people like sausage.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Especially the Germans.
Yes.
Okay, so diatribe, would you consider a hot dog a sausage?
No, a hot dog to me is a hot dog.
I mean, it's
It kinda is.
it's cased ground meat, right? I feel like that's the
Yeah.
that's really a requirement for sausage, is just ground meat cased in more meat.
Yeah. It's weird because I never understood why hot dogs are separated out from other sausages. What makes them so special?
The sawdust.
The sawdust? There you go. That's the... Which is always one of those.
Yeah, the sodium nitrite.
Yeah. It's
That is a silly question. Those are
and-
more special.
the balance of carcinogen to meat is really the deciding factor.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Cameron Christopher Payne on Facebook says, "Good evening. Welcome to our Tuesday show."
Welcome.
Welcome. So we are going to be talking about tone. And for those of you...
Watch your tone with me, mister.
Don't look at me at that tone of voice.
That kind of tone?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So...
Watch your tone.
every creative work has some kind of tone or voice, just the general vibe that all of its themes, motifs, and whatever can be contained within. But the tone is, is it going to be dark and gritty? Is it going to be lighthearted? Is it more jovial or more serious? Is it educational in some cases, or is it purely fantastical? Hey, Tommy. Thanks for popping in chat. So we are going to be talking for the first bit here how every person working on a comic contributes to making that tone, from the writing to the art to the inker and letters and everything in between. So we all have a mix of skills and disciplines here, so it'll be kind of interesting to see how tone informs each one of those, or how we use our different skills to inform tone. So does anyone want to get us started, or you guys have any thoughts about how, say, you would, going into doing pencils, say, if you already kind of know the tone that maybe it's put on the script, or if you want to put your own spin on the tone, how would you go about informing that decision there on how you'd approach pencils or anything like that?
Well, oh, go ahead, Aaron.
I was saying to my, it's funny on the obsoletes. It's just a little bit more of a humorous take. So I've had to switch my drawing style a little more, or it could just be the fact that my drawing style matches the story. So but I tried to keep that in mind when I'm drawing it, that it's supposed to be a little more lighthearted. So I won't. As weird as it is drawing it, so when I draw the technical stuff, it's a little bit more bigger shapes that have not so technical. Like, I can't see doing like technology shape like the detail they do in the Matrix robots and stuff as being humorous, but like you could do kind of bigger shapes.
Sure, yeah.
Kind of adhere to a little more. Maybe it's just more that adheres to a little more simplistic style that kind of goes towards a little more humor.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
maybe not so caught up in like the hard science fiction as much as kind of the science serves a purpose. Kind of like
Right.
the stuff in Futurama, it always has the big red button, or
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, the whole thing is basically, they're making fun of science fiction in it, so it's almost like maybe bringing out the tropes a little more
yeah,
and stuff. But yeah, and I don't put a lot of heavy shadows in my work, but I think also attributes to that sort of lightheartedness. I used to draw shadows and stuff, but I don't know. I just started doing cross hatching. It seems to work. So yeah. Did you have something you wanted to add, Quinn?
Yeah, I was taking my screen
Oh.
live. Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. Also, as far as deciding the tone, I kind of really try to ask that question of, unless I'm aware of what the work is, I try to ask the question of what the tone is supposed to be. And if it's a darker tone, I tend to add a few more shadows to to the art. If it's lighter tone, I try to back up on them a little bit. Even some of the lines, like rendering lines, I try to, if it's not really gritty, I try to not do it so much on the rendering, just because the rendering can get to where it really makes stuff look gritty.
hmm
But a lot of times, an artist is chosen because of his art style, especially if he's really strong with shadows, and stuff like that. He's probably going to get chosen to do darker, grittier stuff. If he's a dirty artist, and I mean that like, if he puts a lot of lines and a lot of grit, he's probably going to get picked or asked to do a title. If he's doing Care Bears, on the other hand, it's yeah, it's that means a lot. But I think sometimes I have to work hard to stay with the tone because I tend to go a little bit darker, grittier.
hmm
Yeah.
So I had to kind of police myself on it.
You slip back in the old habits. And stuff.
yeah,
Yep.
But yeah.
Before you know it, because you're doing a lot of panels in a book, and you gotta stay on task and watch yourself, because you'll just be kind of making the machine go like you usually do, and that machine will ride right back into what you're used to, your comfort zone. You got to be careful if it's something that you're really supposed to be keeping your mind on. But I think I think it's really important that you get with the writer to see what they're looking for, because it could be, it's really important that is captured. I like to do some concept stuff. I'm talking to somebody right now in Silverline where Mackenzie Wortman, we were talking about doing something, and I just did just a bunch of concept stuff, just to make sure we're on the same page. And it's vibing. It vibed really good before I got on Trump's. So I think that's really important, because she hasn't really seen a lot of my stuff, and it just worked out really well for the
Right.
story that she has.
Yeah, and Yeah, it's funny. I did concept stuff of characters. Most of the time I do my own stories. I never do a lot of concept stuff because you just kind of generally know what I want and make it up on the page. So I'm getting used to like. And I always ask people when I turn on pages like you can change anything you want. I mean, with digital technology, you can literally delete a panel and just redraw a panel, put it in. I mean, and so far it's been like thumbs up. So I'm like, okay, cool.
Well, I can change quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I have to do it on a daily basis because in my day job, I'm a graphic artist, and I'm doing everything from WB style Bugs Bunny type mascots all the way to gritty, mean, sharp teeth.
Yeah.
I'm doing elementary school, doing primary school, doing high school stuff, doing college stuff. So you really have to be versatile. And that's okay because that's one piece of art. But when you start talking about a line of work, like a comic, to change indefinitely throughout the whole title, you can do it. But sometimes it may be a little challenging to do that. I know Stephen Butler. He used to do work with Marvel, doing just the superhero stuff.
Yeah.
And then he moved over later on and was doing Sonic the Hedgehog, and he did great on both of them. He's got his comic style. He also has Fiona McCool, which kind of is reminiscent of his Sonic the Hedgehog stuff. But he did really well doing that. He's got like a cartoon style, and he's got like a realistic or comic book style. So he does really good on both. I've seen both, and they're really, really good.
There's some artists out there. I'm trying to think there's other artists out there that can switch style. Jeff Smith actually did a pretty decent job. He did Bone, and then he did Rassel, Rasl. I think it was Rassel, and that was more of an adult story. And he did a pretty decent job of switching to a more grittier tone. Even though it looked like Jeff Smith art, it still had that upper sort of tone to it. And then there are some artists that have a hard time switching tactics, or maybe people won't let them. Tom McFarlane's one that I think always kind of his artist fit for like a certain thing, and I've seen him try to do other stuff. And
yeah, but see him like right there, Todd McFarlane. Love his work.
Yeah.
I just don't see him doing a lot of jovial stuff.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I mean, I'm sure he could. If he wanted to.
Yeah.
I'm sure, right. I mean, there's no reason for him to go that route, but there's definitely, and it's funny because even though I try to change my style here and there with each project, my hand signature as an artist always creeps back in.
Mm-hmm.
But it always looks like art in some capacity.
Yeah.
Do you find that writing him?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, writing for Silverline has been interesting because we are like a PG-13 press, and
what we are? No, I'm just...
Yeah, before that, a lot of stuff I wrote was psychedelic or like grimdark military realism style stuff. So, in the trenches, grabbing your buddy as his brains fall out, or one of my short stories that got published was about a deep sea researcher who was driven insane by like the emanations of a UFO buried underneath the Black Sea, and it drove him to drown himself in the sea because it thought he closer to his alien god. So, not exactly Sonic the Hedgehog.
Right.
I can see. It's funny that he said Silverline's PG-13 because we do borderline horror stuff.
We do borderline horror, but it's not. I can't get away with as gruesome as deaths as I have portrayed in the past. And in my scripting, a lot of my I'll be writing it, but like I said, a lot you'll get into your native style of drawing, and then you just kind of like, wait, I need to touch this up and make it look like the tone of the book. So like my first draft, the characters are spraying a lot, and Like
Yeah.
earlier renditions of scripts, I'm like, yeah, there's gonna be some words I'm gonna have to cut here later, but it helps me get through the process.
I mean, it's weird because I can see like the story you're doing now, like, you know, even in tone. Do you think cursing is sometimes the gore would help the story or hinder the story?
Cursing might. I think gore might actually hinder it. Although we do, we do snapshots. It is a war story, so there are moments.
Yeah.
There's death, but it's not someone being brutally vivisected.
This is
It's
what it looks like when we get hit by a mortar, kids.
it's not Saving Private Ryan like the Omaha Beach scene.
This is what a headshot looks like, kids.
So it's the their head snaps back and there's a spurt of blood and then cut away. That kind of stuff. Or like you see a bang and then someone's gripping something and then like the blood starts to seep through their hand, but it's not like
Yeah.
we're not.
You try to go off panel as much
Yeah.
as you can and let them make the connection.
Yeah.
You do shadows on the wall, maybe. Now, there's sometimes you just can't get away from it.
Yeah.
And as long as it's not like profusive blood and gore.
Well, there's a amount you do to be honest to the subject. Let me turn up the volume. I think that my settings may have Roland's letting us know that our guests were a little quieter, so I just turned you guys up a little bit. That may be a holdover from my paint stream earlier in the weekend. So if you guys want to try talking a little bit.
But it was rolling, so, it could
You
be
guys
his
both have mine,
hearing.
Could be his ears. All right, it looks like we're
Could
about
be his hearing.
balanced now.
Louder! Louder!
Just start screaming out your answers.
Yes. So you do a little bit to be
Sorry,
honest
Roller.
to the subject, but it's also the overall tone is very pensive. So it's like a hardboiled detective. So action has its place to cause those moments, or it causes a palpitation in the heartbeat as the tension is building.
Right.
But if I was just, if I cut as gory as some of my in the trenches style stuff, it wouldn't fit it wouldn't serve the story in the way I wanted it to.
And
Right.
sometimes it can happen. Do you ever guys ever think there's actually ever been any stories or series that you thought that the way they presented it hurt the story in some way? I always think, strangely enough, I did watch some of Game of Thrones, but did you ever think Game of Thrones needed the constant gore and sexual overtones?
The sexual overtones on the HBO show definitely hindered in my eyes. They did.
They could have done a lot of the stuff they did without even ever showing some of the stuff that they showed.
Yeah.
I mean,
To me.
Yeah, in the books, I thought the way they handled it was a lot better. But I thought the gore was well placed because they wanted it to be set in the War of the Roses period, which is and English nobles, even though they kind of gave us our days of chivalry, were notoriously terrible to their enemies and sometimes worse to their friends. So I mean, you have a multitude of kings who had their wives beheaded. So I think the amount of gore they opted for to really show that there are no nice people in the world of politics, and especially this world of politics. I felt like that served the story, but definitely the rampant mating got in the way.
yeah.
It's well, sometimes I think what happens with some of those stories is the more you use it, the more it becomes common, the less shocking it is.
Mm-hmm.
When stuff does happen,
Yeah.
you expect it to be shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you just kept it at the first scene with Jaime and Cersei, that's supposed to be shocking. It was because this is that's taboo. It's,
Yeah.
but then it just kind of gets blasted over and over again, and it's not demonstrating.
Yeah, it's like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
we're doing that again.
if you use it to demonstrate something to the character, sure. But if it's just again and again, you're like, you just run out of budget for costuming? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
I think what it is, they get on HBO and they kind of feel like they have to be provocative
Mm-hmm.
just because they're they're on a platform that allows it. We're gonna do it, and this is what people tune into this channel for. And I just, but like I say, they could have gotten away a lot better without doing a lot of the stuff they did, showing some of the stuff they showed, and I think a lot of shows that do it could. I mean, because we are humans, we know what happens. We've got pretty good imaginations. It's not very hard at all. It's probably easier to infer that somebody is having carnal relations than it is, off-camera violence.
Mhm.
I think.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was a good show, but you had to really watch yourself. That was my snack break. Oh, they're doing this, so we go get some chips.
Yeah. It's one of those hands where you definitely like just like sweep your head across there and make sure the kids aren't in the area.
Yeah.
Because it was, and I do kind of agree that it could be an HBO thing. I've sometimes gotten that too. Well, if we can do it, like people who watch HBO almost expect it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt even that they had, like Suits coming in there saying, hey, well,
we need more boob.
if they wouldn't do it, they'd have Suits coming in there, hey, we're HBO, this is what people are tuning in for, this is the channel, and the time slot we're in, you should be having this.
And it's something that Dean and I have said ad hominem, is that Suits ruin creativity, because they make art by design, not by expression.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and there certainly is, branding can play a strong part in setting the tone as well. Like I said, we're a PG-13 press, so we have like a certain we'll go darker with some tones, but we're not going to go maybe not as grim dark as Spawn or Warhammer. Whereas you expect the Archie company to be generally more lighthearted, and so when they oh my god! But when you got like the one-offs of like Alien versus Archie or Punisher versus Archie,
It was yeah.
it was
I never picked it up, so I don't even know.
it was the right amount of shocking. We're like, okay, here's our one, and we're gonna wait a while before anything else. We're not overloading you with the provocative, but it's they have the right tone, and then it's
I don't even know why I'm doing this feat. I'm sorry.
It's right.
I'm talking to myself. That's what I do.
I feel
when
like
I draw.
the feet in comics though just have they're almost a meme because of
Yeah.
certain art.
They're on a balcony, and this balcony could actually go up farther. So I don't even know why I was completing the feet out. We were talking, so I kind of got sidetracked.
No, it's sometimes. I mean, that's actually been some of my problems in modern comics. Bringing it back to that a little bit is this tone. I read like the first book of Saga. It was okay for me. I mean, I wasn't a huge diehard, but it was weird that so many people, like, he introduced the guys with the TVs for heads or whatever, like first people, them like in the bedroom fornicating, and I'm like, okay, like. I didn't really see any other reason for it except, well, we've dropped the Comics Code Authority, so now we can draw this stuff, so now we have to. Like, if he was this, like, wealthy guy that, had a concubine or harem of women or whatever, and you were trying to state some sort of, like, way he is or whatever, I could see that, maybe.
Right. I mean, that's the archetype of the Nero, where it's like, all right, you have this one guy who is very clearly a megalomaniac, and he's just swathed in women, wine, and grapes. Like, great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly, like, if that's what you're going for, but I didn't get that sense.
Yeah.
I sometimes get the sense from a lot of comic books that we just want to draw this stuff because now we're able to.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't have to deal with the Comics Code Authority. We can draw this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And so that's what they want to do. And I could be wrong, but I get a lot of that. Even when I think it hurts the story.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where I'm just like, I'm not really seeing Sometimes it feels like a bunch of kids in high school finally let off the leash, and now we can draw all the cool stuff we want to draw in high school.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Even DC does that sometimes, where they get like bloody and gory. And I sometimes, if that's DC's way of fighting back against, we're supposed to be the Super Friends, but we're not.
Mhm.
We're Game of Thrones Super Friends or something like that. And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I get it. You don't have to constantly go there. But again, that's always been entertaining to me as far as tone, is why if you add more gore and more sex, then you are more adult.
You're trying to cheat your way into being a darker thing because like it's adult subjects.
Darker, yeah.
Whereas, well, that was interesting. So, as a writer, Karen Gillan, he's probably one of the most varied writers I see right now, just in terms of like the different subject matter he touches and like each different tone. He just did a Warhammer 40,000 book published by Marvel, which is actually pretty good. But it's interesting to see Marvel do something dark, but do it well, and that it wasn't just, it didn't feel like Avengers goes 40K. Then it wasn't just, we can use bolters and just blow up people every other panel to make it. There was certainly the appropriate levels of gore and dismemberment that 40K deserves, but we got a lot of psychological stuff and dealt with, the levels of devotion and fanaticism that really kind of set the actual tone of 40K and make it as dark as it is. It's all about the actual mentalness of both aspects of the universe. And
it's a dark universe, and it would be odd to find it toned down.
Yes. So
just when they tried to do that with the Alien versus Predator movie, they tried to make it PG-13. And that's one example. They've done that with other movies. They tried to tone down the gore, make it PG-13. Everybody pushes back. Predator, I think they did that with one of the Predators. I'm not mistaken.
Wonder if we'll see more of that now that Disney's got it.
Yeah, I know.
That's super weird.
Now, I know, right? Aliens and Predator
If Disney could
being
just
at Disney,
stop buying things.
Yeah. I think I may have said this last week, but it's going to be interesting to see how they fit a princess in there.
There's an alien. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Let's say, well, the Alien Queen is now the princess, right? It's the
Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
We're going to have to name her now.
It's like the scene in Wreck-It Ralph. We have all the princesses and then a xenomorph.
Right.
They did the
A
same
xenomorph tale of love and intrigue.
I heard that Marvel's putting out an Alien comic. I don't know if it's any good.
I have not read it. Yeah. The last thing I read was Dark Horse, and Dark Horse as a publisher was also pretty. Their branding is pretty gritty.
Yeah.
And so their stuff for Alien and Predator was, I felt really, it was on brand and also just very fun. There was, they stayed true to the tone of the subject, but explored it in new ways. They did. They didn't get caught up in just, we got to sell the darkness. It's got to be just, I mean, yes, have Alien Murder on every page because that's the brand, but do more than what we're used to.
Well,
Alien murder. Is it really murder, though? I mean, they're trying to reproduce, and they just have to have dead bodies to do that. So,
It's the life cycle. It's beautiful. It's nature.
yeah. Like a lot of liberals nowadays, they'd be like, leave them alone. They can't help it. You know? Holding up signs with xenomorphs on them.
Yeah. I wish. I might even go to a protest can I put aliens on my
They're just trying to reproduce.
Leave them alone. They're just trying to live their natural life cycle by decimating our civilization.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like the Dark Horse stuff was my favorite, and they kind of almost made the tone of some of the movies. I mean, the AVP movie is based on the original AVP comic, which was much better.
Yes.
Than the movie, but the main structure of the AVP movie was that book, which I thought, okay, all right, I'll give it to you. You kept the main components in that story about her befriending the Predator or whatever.
Yeah.
With him. I think Dark Horse has done just as much to help the Predator and Alien franchise as most other things, as far as tone or whatever.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I have no idea this is happening in Marvel, but I just always, they want to take the Alien, but almost like get rid of the Marine. And I'm like,
that's a no-no.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have the Marines. That's the universe they're in. You can't
Yeah.
we're not going to put them in the Marvel universe. And I'm like, no, because that just makes them a stupid monster when they were actually not a monster in their original universe. They were a threat, but it was, it would fit in their universe. But
Yeah.
comics. And besides, didn't we do this in the '90s with the aliens and predators showing up in every comic, like AVP, Superman, or whatever? So they go through this again. I'm just like, we've already done this.
Yeah. I mean, if they did I wouldn't want to see. I mean, it's a weird a tonal mismatch where you can make a property where it's so dependent on the tone that to pull it out would be weird. So like if they made the Warhammer 40,000 comic more superhero and more Marvel-y, it would fall so flat because they're like there's too much hope. There needs to be less hope.
Because it's supposed to be just like a completely decimated world, constantly at war.
So I wouldn't want to see necessarily the a canon story with predators and aliens being in the Marvel universe because that'll shift their tone so much. Maybe like a one-off joke where we cut to a panel and then in the background you see a predator. But if they were to do, we got side stories. We have, Marvel's multiverse is fantastic for this. We got, they did darker takes on some of the heroes with like the Nor series. If they did an alternate universe where Nova got stuck on a xenomorph-infested planet, that'd be a fun read.
I mean, you could. I think it would be easier to bring the Marvel heroes to the aliens than bring the aliens to the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
Especially with they already have all the you could do a Guardians of the Galaxy, I guess. I mean, you could, it might be kind of more humorous, but I mean, you could attempt something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. That's one. I mean, I do think tone matters, and I do know that when I know certain companies like Marvel and stuff have specific tones they go for because they're trying to be family orientated.
Yeah.
But I kind of just lose hope when certain properties go their direction. Like, we're going to buy it out. And I'm like, yeah, and you're going to ruin it. I mean, so, I mean, there's a reason why Disney, I mean, it's like, because I'm like, look at Disney. If you really wanted to make Predator and Terminator type films, you would have done that years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you don't. So why are you even buying this property?
Because
that's the thing I never understood. It's like you buy it just to bury it, I guess. I mean, Star Wars fit Disney, Alien and Predator. I mean, like, if you buy it, why didn't you just sell it to another bidder or do it to somebody else? That's the thing that irritates me. It's like,
we need more market share.
I guess. I know, obviously, it's just, well, we're going to buy it up so our competition can't make stuff.
Yeah.
But still, it's kind of frustrating a little bit when you're a fan of those properties.
What I thought was interesting was, the original Star Wars trilogy was fairly lighthearted. The prequels are not real, but when Disney bought Star Wars, they had already done like lighthearted, high energy action adventure, but it still felt off in quite a few ways. Yeah.
I mean, John Carter of Mars felt more like a Star Wars film, than the Star Wars films. That's kind of a little surprising to me.
Yeah, I feel like they almost tried to maintain the same level of lightheartedness in certain areas while also darkening it down in places it did not need to be.
Yeah. I think they didn't quite, like, the original trilogy had this, which is your basic storytelling structure. It starts out hopeful, and then things go wrong, and then The Empire Strikes Back is your darkest hour, and then we get out of that at the end. It's that I mean, most stories do this.
Yeah.
Everything's looking great, everything, goes to hell, we get back out of it. There's more structures to story than that, but that's a general storytelling. Thing is all the dark parts were scattered throughout, and it's better to just kind of, I mean, that's the thing I always try to tell certain writers, not to say I'm the greatest writer, but it's like, if you write a character, don't be afraid to kick the crap, just destroy your character, put him in through just, hell and back. I mean, that's kind of the idea. So just put him in, like, and have the hero get out of it.
Yeah.
but really kind of like not so much sadistically torture, but really make it get as bad as it can and have them get out. That's what makes the hero.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that you felt in the original trilogy was that sort of hopelessness the rebels were up against. I mean, that the Empire is everywhere. You didn't really get that with the newer films that much.
No. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. There was no. It felt too, and this is also present in other comics where it was you overwhelm it with too much of. I mean, you can have the tone where it kind of shades everything happening in the story where, even if we have dark moments, it never goes below a certain threshold. But it felt like
Right.
it wasn't going to break the threshold either way. Where the first one was everything is great all the time. The second one was everything is terrible, and then the third movie was we are trying to figure out who the bad guy is because we realized we did not have a bad guy for the first two movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and that just kind of overshadowed everything. You couldn't really see the rest of the movie because it just got lost in its own map making. But I mean, that's the thing with stories is that there needs to be moments of change, and characters need to, undergo shifts and growth. Not only to push the story forward, but also to help us relate to them. And so, if everything is stuck static in one position or the other, they feel like, the kind of person we just wish would leave us alone. And like, you're too perky or you're too sad all the time. I wish you would leave.
This is what gets me. There's a lot of stories, and I find this more in romance stories or dramas, but other people talk about this, where it's just like you always have these people who are very sarcastic or very mean, or just terrible people, and they don't change because that's their selling point. Is like there's these mean, crass people, and they never go anywhere. And even my friend has talked about that. Where he's like, I watch a lot of movies and stories where I'm like, this person's just kind of so, mean and horrible. Why should I even care about what? But like, you can't tell who the bad guy. I'm trying to think of examples of this because there's been many, but pin it down to one. Where everyone is just kind of like a lot of criminal movies are like that. But I found other movies too. Or stories or two. I'd have to think about it. But it just seems like everyone is kind of this sort of broken human being in a way. I don't know, emotionally or something, and they're just all mean. But they never change, and that's the idea. I mean, if you start your character off being mean and irritable and this kind of jerk, then he has to eventually soften up. I mean, that's what happened to Han Solo. That's a perfect arc of that character. But a lot of them don't. They just keep them that way because that's what sells.
There even needs to be just like a reason for it behind it. I mean, that's what I think why a lot of people like Marvel's Loki is, he's a giant jerk and he's the perfect trickster, but it's covering up an innate flaw in that he just wishes he wishes his family was more like Thor's family. He wishes he like had that same relationship with them.
Right.
And so that's sort of his way of lashing out and you see both sides of that, like the fact that it's not just mischievousness for the sake of being mischievous, it's coming from a place of grief, and you see that play in him throughout the movies. I mean, the second one was also not great, but he's definitely more so in Ragnarok, and now also in the show it's happening with that. You see a lot of Loki dealing with his own inner struggle, and that he's not just mean for the sake of being mean.
Yeah, he's. I think it's also kind of like he has that sort of invisibility in his family, like in the small. If you're a small child and you're the middle child, so to speak, or whatever. Like that's kind of what I always took that as. It's like he's always lashing out just so somebody would notice to pay attention to him, or just thinking I could do whatever I want because no one cares about me anyways.
Yeah.
So, and I think that, I mean, of course, that character become more interesting than Thor, because Thor doesn't really, I mean, besides gaining weight, how has he changed?
Right. And,
so,
yeah, and I hope that's what we go Thor with the Odin son story. If they do that, is Thor's big change, realizing that he's not as great as he thinks he is, and that maybe he's better off being unworthy. And it's also interesting, like, coming back to it, is as a weird like tonal shift for Thor in the comics is when he realizes, like, no, I'm just going to give Jane the hammer. I can do better without it. And Viking murder becomes a very real thing, but it's definitely an interesting change where you'll see someone give up on themselves, but also realize that that's them not wanting to be the best is what allows them to become the better version of themselves, because they're no longer trying to, exceed at everything. They're just trying to do what they're good at, which is yeah. So it's a very weird. It's the most humanizing moment for Thor, because he realizes that even as a god, he's not. He's not Odin. He's not all powerful, omnipotent.
Not like his dad, that he has problems. And I remember in the original myths, Thor's big problem was his ego, his pride, and his anger towards the degree.
Yeah.
And they kind of took that a little out of the movies. I think that was when they made, because they first started doing Thor, I'm like, okay, this sounds like the character, and then Marvel's made everyone a jokester, everyone's quippy, which completely defeats the point of Tony Stark. Because I'm like, if everyone's making jokes as Tony Stark, then
No.
But I feel like Thor's character, even at least in the movies, has got kind of lost in the shuffle. Captain America had an arc. Even though he was my favorite character, but he kept getting lost in his own movies. It was like, people like, Civil War is awesome, and it's like, what do you remember from Civil War? And it's like all the superheroes fighting. It's like, but Captain America's in it. It's like, he was. He was like lost in that.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, do you sometimes think that this is for even comics and movies and stuff, that ongoing stories can sometimes hurt characters because you can't give them that complete arc?
Definitely, and I think that's the reason why, at least from the big two, I only buy trade volumes or collected editions. Because I mean, this story has to have a beginning, middle, and end, and so you can have a cliffhanger, and sure, that's fine, whatever. But if it's just bouncing from one conflict to the next, you get what's called we called it action movie fatigue, where there's no moment of resolution or development. It's just fight, and it's exciting for a bit, but it doesn't allow you to actually,
Yeah, I get tired of stuff. I get tired of tropes. I get tired of the same thing being done over and over. Like, man, I was so glad when the 80s, actually the early 90s, got out of the whole thing of such and such action hero is out for revenge. They killed his brother, and then he slams open the door. Who killed my brother? And he goes tearing people up. It's always somebody killed my wife, somebody killed my brother, somebody killed my dad. And I'm going to kill everybody's dad, brothers, and mothers, and
Yeah.
I was so glad to see that go, because they had played it. That and apocalypse movies. Holy moly. The 80s was full of them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mad Max. I guess Terminator would be an apocalypse movie, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, see, is they have something that happens that's successful.
Yep.
And then they've got to put out 50, from that point on for a certain amount of time till people just get flat sick of it.
Yeah.
They're going to make so many different clones of it to try to make that dollar. Which, I'm all for making money. Hey, we all got to eat. We all got kids and dogs and whatever. But, man, I just, I get tired of stuff real quick.
Yeah.
I have that a lot when I used to talk to other writers who, I remember this one guy years ago made his comic of like this guy in like Mesoamerica or something. He was like a South American sort of kind of Conan character. I'm like, well, this is really cool. I mean, he's got the gods and all this. And he brought up one issue, and I'm like, well, this is different. I mean, this is something I've never seen. It's like, kind of like a Tarzan type character, but in South America, that sort of culture. And then he was like, it didn't sell well, or he didn't like it, or he's like, he's like, the real money is in superheroes, and as I'm going to make a superhero team in it, I'm like, okay. And he brought up one issue, and I never heard from him again. And he was like, because that's what people are buying, is superheroes. And I'm like, yeah, but you have something unique that I think actually does have merit if you just stick with it, but you don't because you're chasing the dollar signs.
Yeah.
and you're like, why do what everyone else does? And this is why I told one writer before. I remember saying I was working for somebody who was making a show, a sci-fi kid show, and I told him like, well, we're going to be in competition with like the Clone Wars and stuff, the cartoon, and he was like, no, and I'm like, well, yeah, we are. I mean, I know you don't see that because you think Star Wars is like, but I mean, we are going to be in competition, and what I tried to help him because he got a lot of influences from Star Wars, and I know a lot of people who's like, well, if we make it like Star Wars, people will come to see my stuff because it'll be like Star Wars, and they like Star Wars, so they read my stuff, and I'm like, I wish it worked that way, but it really doesn't.
No.
If people like Star Wars, they're gonna watch and buy Star Wars.
Yeah.
They're not gonna go find analogies of Star Wars and other things. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And so I see a lot of people try to do that, and they fail miserably.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, and it's. I mean, obviously, you're always going to pull on things that like inspire us. So if you read and watch a lot of Star Wars, you're probably going to pull on some Star Wars. But when you get to like trying to like replicate in certain ways, that's when you get into some danger. Because if you're just naturally like writing what you think is actually interesting, right, and some of your Star Wars seeps in, then people are going to come for what's interesting, and then if they recognize the Star Wars elements, they're like, oh, I know like where you got it, that's cool, and they're going to recommend it to their Star Wars friends. So it can work, but it can't be the focus.
No.
Yeah.
It's got to be very subtle. It's if you work very heavy-handed. I mean,
yeah.
It can work with a general tone, but it's always. I think it's much better if you're going to go that route. Have like 75% of it be your own stuff.
Yes.
Maybe
at least. Yeah.
People like to go 50-50. I mean, I remember you made a character look just like Boba Fett. I mean, it was like, but he was orange. Yeah. And I was like, "This is Boba Fett," and he's like, "No, it's not." I'm like, "Yes, it is." I'm like, let me. And I asked him to change. I gave him like little wings. I'm like, let me give him something to separate. And he's like, "Yeah, but people like Boba Fett." I'm like, "I know, that's what I mean. You like Boba Fett. I'm not gonna like this character because he looks like Boba Fett."
Yeah.
They're gonna like. It's like so. It's really hard for them to explain. It's like fans are fans of one thing and they like that thing. They're not looking for other things.
Yeah.
They're not like, "Well, I'm tired of Harry Potter and Star Wars, so I'm gonna go look for things like that." That's
I mean, yeah, it's like you exist in the same genre, but you can't exist as direct application. That's how you get known as being the Walmart brand Star Wars, or yeah,
definitely.
So it's and I know I mean this has been one of my things that sometimes, like with independent comics and maybe Western comics, is I know we like superheroes, but I just can't think of any other story I want to read about.
Yeah.
Spandex right now,
Yep.
except the established few. I mean, if I want to read an X-Men comic, I read the X-Men, but every time people bring up more superheroes, I'm like, you got to get something. And this maybe it's just me personally. I mean, I could be talking against the norm, and maybe everyone just loves superheroes, but I don't know. I just assume with the sales of manga that superheroes are maybe waning a little bit,
or they're. I mean, it's the same thing. We're talking about, like you get locked into what you like. I mean. I'll read X-Men. I read a ton of X-Men, but if I see something like some other super thing, I'm like, okay, did the powers come from magic, radiation, technology? Okay, I've read that before.
Yeah.
I mean, I have this pitch out. So I'm going to just hit it again, so in case anyone watching wants to draw a comic. My idea for a superhero comic was actually a Roman mythology comic. But it's set in like far from the future, so it's humans colonize the planets. They're like, oh, the planets are actually the Roman gods, and the Roman gods are like, hey, you guys want to be like some chosen level ascendant type stuff?
Yeah.
And so I mean that's for me it was just like space travel is cool and Roman mythology is cool. The superheroes are just a way of combining those.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
Work. I mean, you can do super powered things. I mean, this is why I tell people like the only superhero that I really like and read anymore is Wonder Woman. But I don't really almost consider Wonder Woman a superhero because she is more like
Consider super babe.
Well, she's fighting like mythological monsters and super babes. Yeah, but she's fighting like mythological monsters or fighting gods or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And she's not like your typical superhero is not like fighting crime.
Yeah.
Like there's a whole mythology surrounding it. So she reminds me much more of a comic book version of like Clash of the Titans.
Yeah.
Those old ones than a superhero, and that's what I like. In fact, when she starts fighting crime or whatever, I lose interest. and the majority of it's surrounded with her, mythology. I'm like, well, that's cool. And the fact that she's an ambassador, not actually a superhero, which is so kind of strange. It's always weird that every time somebody gets powers, like they must put on a costume and fight crime. I always want to know what neighborhoods they live in, because I hear about crime, but it's not like I'm dodging gunfire walking around my town.
It's like we get the occasional carjacking or something, but it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
that was hilarious. There's a documentary of real life superheroes that it's a few years old, but there's one with these 3 people who actually, like, they showed them training on the rooftops, shooting bows and arrows, like they're gonna go out and fight crime, and there's 2 guys and a girl. So they wanted to set up to, like, basically ensnare somebody in a trap. So they had her be kind of provocative. And she's walking up and down in this one part of the street in, like, this completely shadowed area. And they were hiding just beyond, waiting for the guy to jump up and harass them. They were going to go, kick some superhero butt. And they're like, nothing happened. And I'm like, well, yeah, because criminals are much smarter than you think. This is not a comic book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like you just have some girl walking out and all of a sudden people just come, like, out of the shadows or something and start, like...
Not only that, most crime is so random, and so it's in such random places. I mean, I don't even know how one would do it. Even if you, who was it that had the police scanner, and that was how they were kind of getting to stuff. But if it comes over a police scanner, the police are already going.
Yeah.
It's already happened. It's done.
It was a weird, like, even when I watched, I was watching, like, one of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies on TV, and I caught, and I mean, like,
bold choice.
Always thought it was funny. Now the way they did New York, like, every time he's trying to do something, like, there'd be some high-speed car chase action scene, and it was always like, and, like, just happened to always be like there was crime 24 hours a day. Like, every time he'd do something, the cops would be whizzing by, not because there's a domestic dispute or a stuck kitten. No, it's a robbery and some high. It's like, I mean, it's a superhero world, and so I enjoy it. So every time people make a superhero and then either have them fight crime or whatever, I kind of just lose interest almost immediately. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But if they put enough, like, ideas into the enemy, Wildcats, I actually give them credit. So generally Wildcats, like, because they're more sci-fi, and they were fighting, like, an alien enemy. I'm like, okay, that's cool. You give some thought, they're fighting something. Well, and it's like, no, I must go fight crime because I have powers, and that's what people with powers do.
I mean, I get why, superheroes started, like, as crime fighters in the first place is, 1930s, 1940s. You get the idea. And we're like, we already have one great evil in the world, and we kind of don't want to touch that with a 12-foot pole.
Right.
What's the next thing that everyone hears of? Bank robberies. Okay. It's like, all right, I'm going to do good for it. I'm going to fight a bank robber. We haven't got to the point right now. We haven't got to the point where you hear stories about, like, real life, like, evil mining conglomerates, like, starting proxy wars in the Congo. Like,
Exactly.
Now our heroes can fight bigger things than just criminals.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of those old superheroes are basically more colorful versions of cops and robbers type stories. I mean, so I get that, but it's strange enough, do you think sometimes American comics hold a little too much onto the past as far as tone? This is kind of a weird question. So in other words, I see a lot of comics, like if I go into independent comics, I see a lot of comics that are like Two-Fisted Tales, which is a real comic, or action comics. Like there's a lot of people that will do old time comics that they grew up with, but I see this not being a rarity as more of a commonality.
Yeah,
like they're constantly chasing that golden era as far as tone or whatever.
It's nostalgia by design.
Tone a little bit where I'm like, comics have kind of. Entertainment's grown up.
Kind of hard to say, but I would say as far as the crime thing goes and all that, I don't know what it is, and I'm not one to particularly like it myself. But I think something can be said for shows like NCIS having 15 seasons.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Law and Order. In any, like, SVU, all those lasting for like 20 seasons. I don't even know how many seasons that thing has been on. lawyer shows, doctor shows, those are the ones that stick. The ones that usually don't make it, you know, I mean, people just love that stuff. I don't know. I'm not one personally that too much, it's okay every now and then, but obviously there's a big part of the population that it digs,
Yeah.
like the police, crime, community helpers. I got little kids, so they're community helpers. The community helper shows, I don't know what that is. To me, it's a phenomenon. Like, how did this show get took off, and this show's still on, and it's.
I can actually pull in my degree here to do a little bit of market psychology for entertainment, and then we'll cut to the next subject.
Do it.
But so there's we talk about this a lot in our writing for film class, as well as in our writing for marketing and marketing psychology classes. But there is something essentially. I mean, well, we're all familiar with the term digest in terms of like entertainment or media. You have your film digest. It's your easy way to consume information.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get procedurals, you end up getting the procedural digest, where everyone knows how the story ends. It's good guys catch bad guys, or doctor cures disease. But it's it's the procedural, so it's the process of getting to point A to B, and
Right.
you do get some mystery in there. That's why Matlock was also took. Well, went as long as it did, and they even poked fun at Matlock itself. Where like people know you're going to get the man, they just want to know how. But it's easy to digest. You know what's going to happen, and probably the time frame is going to happen, and you give yourself minimal guessing room in terms of, all right, if it's House, at some point you're going to be asking, is it Hodgkins? It's not Hodgkins. Okay. You just give yourselves those minimal guessing points. So it's easy digest. So if you come home from work after a long day or whatever, you turn it on. It help. They do this also, a study with ADHD. Why people with ADHD will watch the same show over and over again. Thank you, The Office, for saving my life. But they know how it's going to end, so there's no room to stress in it. So that same logic is then applied to the procedural digest. There's no stress in watching it because you know how it's going to end. You're just there, kind of gradually working through, getting through all the points, but it's not actually causing you to do deep metaphysical thinking. And so that's why those shows that do cause you to have those longer thoughts are fewer and far between, but when they pop off, they do, because it's considered the thinking man show. So Game of Thrones, for the while that it was popular before the last 2 seasons, The Expanse and Vikings were all big ones where, Vikings had that also because they're based on like the sagas, so those are already written down. We knew how that ended, but they changed some things, and a lot of it also was like bullet points, like in this year this guy did this thing. We don't actually know the rest of the story behind it, so they had a lot of room to actually create the twists and turns. But those shows pop off because, cause you think. But other shows that try to do that same thing, if they just miss it by like 1 or 2 beats, they're going to fall off because they're not easy to digest. So if people don't get exactly what they want in those bigger shows, they're going to go to easy to digest. So like if it's not the Vikings or Expanse right now, I'm watching The Office or Gundam.
It's funny. I would say that, and I also say with the criminal shows, the one difference between, if you were to compare superhero fighting crime or crime to modern, is like especially Law and Order and SI about investigation, and also court cases, which are actually talking about the judgment of justice or onto the case, which you don't get in superhero stories.
Mm-hmm.
You do get some investigation, a little bit. Batman even is a little investigation. I mean, it's weird. I mean, people are always like, he doesn't do a lot of investigating. He's mostly punching criminals. So I think I think if superhero stories actually created where they caught the criminal and then went into the case, I think Daredevil did that a little bit.
Daredevil a little bit, and so did She-Hulk, yeah.
She-Hulk, yeah. Going into the case of what is judgment or whatever, that engages the viewer a little bit more than just catching the criminal, hand him to the cop, then go out and find the next criminal. I mean, that's like watching a rat catcher go out and catch rats.
Yeah.
So I think procedurals, TV procedurals, are more popular than superhero adventure stories. I think there's a difference because of the investigative and the procedural, like procedural work and procedural as in law procedural, like this law. Law and Order. I mean, come on. I mean, every show, the cases always happen after the fact. They're investigating it, and then it goes to a court of law, and then they judge in a matter of days, which is always entertaining to me because those could take years.
So, Tim,
but same concept. So I think there's a little more of engagement. I think if superheroes actually did that more, they might actually be captured. And I'm surprised no one has ever thought about that in superhero independent comics about making, one. I think the only one that maybe tried to do that a little bit was Powers. I think they were
Yeah.
more regular cops a little bit,
Yeah.
just taking that idea of, what is your, I mean, this is your crime, what is your judgment? We've done a lot of the sort of God complex with superheroes, whether they, Superman has a right to do what he wants because he can do it, but not a lot of judgment or whatever. I don't that I can see being the difference. But again, I think people like crime because they like to feel they're right. There's a moral superiority to those shows.
Yeah.
He got what's coming to him. The law always wins, sort of thing. This is why I find I'm such a fan of Judge Dredd, because he takes that to the extreme. Which just like, I mean, I remember one of the comics, he ends up nuking one of the other megacities.
Yeah.
He obliterates it off the earth, and they're like, "You just killed millions of people. Why?" And he's like, "They broke the law." I can't remember exactly what law they did. And it's like, then to him, it was like he had no remorse, no regrets, nothing. They broke the law. That's their punishment. So, which I think is a way, and even England has said Judge Dredd was a way of making fun of American action heroes.
Yeah.
They said that before.
So, Tim, you watch a lot of The Office. Do you go around with that's what she said jokes when people talk?
I don't, but we do like the occasional Dwight quote or
Right.
yeah.
Did you like Parks and Rec too?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. I like The Office and Parks and Rec. Did they do a third one from the same sort of team, or was?
I can't remember if they did. I know Superstore is kind of that same vine, but I'm hit and miss with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is 9:10 now on the Pacific Standard Time. So we're going to again cut to our second subject, but after we hit our mid-roll for our sponsors, and those are again Daytona Beach Comic Convention, your premier stop for all things collectibles and comics in the Daytona area, September 18th and 19th. Visit their website, DaytonaBeachComicConvention.com, for tickets, booths, availability, everything like that. As well as History Camp America, July 10th, 2021, brought to you by History List. This is going to be a day-long history conference where you can attend for free online and just watch a bunch of lectures on a bunch of cool history things. Yeah, and they are also, the History List is a weekly news blast newsletter type thing where they email out talks with historians on those types of subjects. So again, we are talking about tone, and we're going to now change a little bit. We probably touched on this a bit, but we're just letting the natural conversational juices ebb and flow as they please. Until at the end of the hour we are caught in the grease trap of life. And we are talking, we just spent the last hour talking about tone in terms of the creative process, and just kind of wandered from there. This we're going to be talking about tone more so as like the decision making or even marketing process. So the two big tones we see a lot in comics in terms of overall umbrellas is your traditional lighthearted, kind of color poppy Superman, like traditional American values, that sort of thing, like we were just talking about, where it's much more lighter. Good guy always gets his guy. Not a whole lot of moral gray area. It's the bright blue and red spandex of your reading, and versus the other darker and grittier stuff that seemed to emerge in the 80s, 90s, stuff like The Dark Knight, stuff like The Ultimates, where Spawn, Invincible even. Invincible is a fun juxtaposition of both.
Yeah.
But where it's you get played more with like the moral gray area, or even just deal with selling some of those materials in ways that are shocking by design, or perhaps conducted in a way that is not the most righteous. And so we already kind of talked about, like, the issue of if you become overburden the shocking by design, where it's just back to back and it just drowned out the rest of the story, and that can be an issue like Game of Thrones and their adult relations scenes. But But if you do shocking well, where it's you do it to sell a point or to describe a character, kind of like the opposite end of that same act is the Nero trope for a character, where it's you're selling the fact that they're a megalomaniac by showing that they've convinced these swath of people to embrace degeneracy with them, or Armor 40,000, you sell the fact that it is a terrible, bleak universe by the fact that people die almost hourly in the most grotesque ways you can imagine. And that's how you pitch the idea that like it's not a fun place, you don't want to be here, but we can tell some interesting stories in that same place that don't always revolve around people just being brutally blown to bits. So we're going to be talking about kind of the pros and cons of going either way, and what would inform your decision as a creative team to pursue being more color poppy and lighthearted and capes and spandex, or if you did decide to go more dark, gritty, and bleak with your storytelling. And so if anyone has any ideas on the benefits or detriments of each that you might have to deal with going forward, or when you create your own idea, what makes you think this needs to be lighthearted, or no, this needs to be darker?
You're talking about writing our own stories or like selling it?
Writing, selling it, general creative process, anything like that. So Quentin can even talk about the deciding tone going into a board game.
Well, my drive when I was doing the board game is to it's really fun, but the content is very fantasy, so it really is what you make it. Now, as far as the art style, it's like the style that I'm using here, a little bit grittier, but I mean, I could have easily, with this game style, I could have easily went with like a World of Warcraft type style for all the characters and items and all that kind of stuff, and it would have worked. But I just lean kind of toward the darker style, grittier. So I don't really know why I decided to do what I did, other than that's just kind of what I do.
I mean,
But and really in a game situation, it's not really. It's not really a story. I mean, you have a story in it, and it will have a tone. But really, that when you actually start playing the game, like any other RPG game, the players kind of make it light or dark, serious or playful. So it's I just kind of made a world for people to roam around in and have a little bit of fun, get some gear. Destroy some evil beings or good, depends on what you want to do, what you want to be. So yeah, I would liken it to kind of like Masters of the Universe. It's got a little bit of tech, like the Ancients had tech.
Yeah.
And it's kind of followed down, but there's also a magic component to the tech, and so it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But as far as the tone, I mean, it really is in a game what you make it. But as far as like the hard material, I don't have, until I start doing the expansions, it's not really going to have its story fleshed out. I would say probably the story is a little bit dark and jovial at the same time, because pretty much the world has no magic other than what's in relics. That's why it's Relic Quest. There used to be a lot of magic, and then there was a great war that happened, and right in the center, like the climax of it, magic just totally disappears. And so there was whole races that were totally obliterated because of that, because their life force was actually built on the magic. So there's it's kind of a post-apocalyptic kind of place, but it doesn't mean some fun can't happen,
Yeah, I mean, that's also one of the fun things about RPGs is it is kind of whatever you make it, but I mean, dark comedies are some of my favorite. Blackadder, as opposed to Monty Python, is had some of the best like British sketch comedy I've ever seen. And also, I think kind of like when I am kind of naturally drawn towards darker stuff sometimes, also in the creative process. And
Yeah.
I mean, art is subjective. Our brains are hardwired to like a certain thing. Sometimes we just do. I mean, I have this skull just hanging out right next to Saint 14 on my shelf here. I have Othello's skull.
Well, I have to do things when I'm writing stuff. I have to do things to inject a little bit of funny in it, because I'm just a picker and I'm a funny.
Yeah.
I like funny stuff. I like to laugh, and I like serious and dark stuff. But I don't like when something's supposed to be dark or foreboding, and then somebody throws the one-liner in there. I don't like that too much.
Right.
I mean, so that's kind of what I do. I don't like to go one way or the other.
Yeah. I like it when you can tell there's a character who's kind of using it as like a coping mechanism. So it really kind of sells like that. Like, oh, they're in the crap right now because he's like, I'm going to make a joke because I got nothing else.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it's funny. I think even in my story, I have kind of humorous in my goblins. There's definitely humorous storytelling, like gag, almost like 4-page gag setup, like gag strips. But there is definitely serious stuff that happens too. It's funny. So people ask me, my tone I think would be more drama, more serious, but I break those serious tones with bits of humor. Jeff Smith was classic at that with Bone. He'd have serious, dark stuff, and then he would break it with humor, and that was well done. But it's sometimes kind of hard to do it. I mean, it's hard to do that sometimes with tone. There was an anime, Neon Genesis Evangelion, that was also very good at doing that. Well, the first part of the show was very adventurous and kind of a little more goofy at serious tones, but then of course towards the end it got very dark.
At the end it turned into an existential crisis.
Yeah, it did. It was, I mean, it's funny because I've watched that series many times. You watch the beginning, and there's like the goofy stuff with Asuka and Shinji and stuff fighting over being housemates or whatever. Yeah, and then it goes. So it's funny.
And they do a really good job of leaning you in too, because they have that, but at the same time, you contrast with the Shinji's relationship with his father, and that becomes increasingly more prevalent, and you realize like, oh, this is a very bad relationship, and then you realize, oh, this is a very bad world.
Yeah. It's weird 'cause the world looks like your typical modern world. That was really. Do you sometimes find it easier to keep, like you were talking, like tone or adding things in, like in a shorter story than a longer? In other words, if it's a 4-issue series, it's pretty easy to keep the general tone idea, even to sell it. You sell it in action. But the longer it goes, do you find it harder to keep that tone? Do you feel like you want to shake it up and break things up?
Yeah, definitely. Especially, my longest work is a novel, and that was, you get to a point where you almost feel like you need to give yourself a brain break from your subject matter, especially if I was writing cyberpunk story, so that was, dark by design. Kind of like, what if I just immerse myself in all the flaws of modern society and what I think they'll lead to? It's great for your mental health. But if you spend too much time in there, I think that's also why a lot of writers, like Brandon Sanderson mentioned this, they develop the habit of writing so much in one thing and then bouncing back to another project, writing into that, and then coming back to your main project, giving your brain time to subconsciously like recompile the information you'll be working with without drowning in it. And it actually, and you may think you lose the tone, but I almost feel like you keep the tone more fresh that way. Because you come back, read the last chapter, and like, okay, this is what I was doing, and you go back in with your new ideas on like, how do I really double down on what I was just doing with this? So writing Wolf Hunter, which was a 3-issue, that one I could kind of just marathon because it would be before that time frame even like eclipsed where I needed to take a brain break. It was just how do I as many ways lie to the main character and kind of get the audience in on the lie before I flip it. and
Yeah.
then that I was able to just work on that. And then when I flipped it, that's about at the right time because I'm like, okay, now the action wheels may take off, and that allowed me to still saying that same tone but with a different motif, and that kept it new for me.
Yeah. It's sometimes hard, yeah, to get serious. I usually, if I'm writing towards the end or whatever, but I always have a habit of injecting humor into my stories, whether I want to or not. I don't know.
Yeah, I
Do you?
I injected humor as well in Wolf Hunter, but I kept it very British because the secondary tone, the first tone is pensive, the second tone is British. So the guy is a middle class time in England at the time, so at the time they're very patriotic. RAF group captain, to be an officer in the King's Army is the greatest thing you could possibly do in this guy's world. So it's kind of Richard Ayoade, Monty Python style humor, just the right levels of dry and punnery on it.
Do that? No, you write mostly more serious stories.
Typically, yeah. I haven't done even like my action stuff is in some way darker or comes from a set in something that's terrifying. My science fiction is all mind-boggling. I'm not trying to say that I mind-boggle the reader. I'm not that pompous, but I say that I mind-boggle myself and just trying to how do I make it seem like I was on just a ton of ayahuasca while writing this. But it's try to deal with things that are incomprehensible terrors and very eldritch horror style thing, or actiony. It's trying to sell my boots on the ground style stuff is more war is a terrible place you do not want to be, and so it goes into the visual horror of that really, and even more I wrote a piece of Norse mythology into a kid's book, and even that was a story of Tyr and Fenrir, where Tyr gives up his arm in order to stave off the wolf so he can be chained. Yeah, and so that I went into the fact that he's doing a noble thing and offering up the sacrifice, but it's a terrible, not fun experience. And he's literally facing down the end of the heavens and earth, and he's like, all right, well, I guess I got to do this now.
Well, I guess usually the tone that I inject into something is not something I really think about it. It's usually born with whatever the thing is that I'm, I guess it's born with the story. It's what kind of makes it cool to me at the time. I know exactly whenever I'm thinking of something, what kind of story it's going to be. It's not something I decide after the fact. If I think something's funny, I think, hey, this would be a pretty funny story, then it's naturally just jovial. If it's something that's, man, wouldn't it be really cool if there was this guy and he was just this king killer or something, and went around from kingdom to kingdom, just causing upheaval and distress. It just kind of, that's how stories usually go with me.
Yeah. I'd say my when I get really deep into the deciding the tone of everything, that's after the idea generation has already happened. I have oh, this is a cool idea, and I put it down on the cork board or something. But when I go back to actually creating out the beats and stuff, I'm okay, how do I want to tell the story? What do I think would work best with this style of plot?
I like dark, but I don't really care for brooding. There's I don't mind having a brooding character in it, but the main character being too brooding, I just, it's one of those things that, as for me, I'm a little bit over. Eventually, maybe, I'll be cool with it again, but, to me, it's been done so much,
How do you feel about the Witcher?
I love it.
Okay, yeah.
and I know he's a brooding character, but I don't know.
I
It
think
just
that
it
world,
just works better with some things than
Yeah.
others, and he's probably the only brooding thing that I
Sure.
watch. You know,
Yeah.
I think as the world is a little more. I'm not saying lighthearted. It's dark, but it's not dark intentionally. Like there's like sunlight,
Yeah.
bright colors, a little more saturated, but there's dark undercurrents. I think that kind of breaks up in the brooding character. Yeah, Batman's the ultimate brooding character, but he lives in a dark night with gargoyles.
Mhm.
Apparently, they just import gargoyles to Gotham by the truckload.
I'll give you an example though. I used to watch what was it? Angel
Yeah.
the years ago.
Buffy spinoff. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And I just got so sick of it, because it's almost like, he just always had to be brooding, and it's like his
Yeah.
character never really changed from this. His default setting was brooding all the time, and it just kind of got to be a joke, and even they were making fun of it all the time, and it was just man, that is so true with some stories. If they just lighten some of them up some.
Yeah.
You can have darkness and not have brooding. You can have.
This
And
one,
I guess maybe maybe I'm getting my terminology mixed up a little. Maybe brooding is not as all encompassing as I make it sound, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The guy could have like the greatest thing happen to him, and he's like, whatever.
Too stuck in his own misery. Yeah.
I mean, Pooh would have never got off the ground if if it was not Pooh, it was Eeyore. If Eeyore had his own show, can you imagine that? Well, hello everyone. I just don't really care for too much brooding. And see, I don't look at The Witcher. That's a little different because things are all continually happening to him.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a good one. There's a show, and it's got a new season now. It's on Netflix. And this is the kind of thing I get tired of, too, is when they do the same thing over and over. What is it? I can't remember the name of it, but it's about the Danes and the English. And the main character in it is a Dane. Well, he's actually English that got taken as a boy, and they pretty much made him a Dane.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah, I'm not sure.
Sounds interesting, though.
it's really good. It's a really good show, but it's run for 3 seasons, and I think they just got another season. But, man, every time that guy makes it a little bit farther, it's like stuff happens to him. It's like the writers are doing stuff to this guy all the time just to keep him down,
Yeah.
just to give him a reason to be,
Yeah.
It just seems a little too manufactured sometimes.
I think,
if he gets a girlfriend, she dies.
Perfect.
If he gets a wife, she dies. It's like he can never get a break. This guy, and it just gets a little old after a while. Give the guy something.
Give somebody a break. I mean, that was like the big joke in Charlie Brown, Charles Schultz. I mean, he never got a break. He did give him some breaks. I mean, they asked him, "Was he ever going to kick the football?" No. He said no. He's never going to. That's not going to happen. But it was almost making fun of would you consider Charlie Brown a brooding character? Maybe. I think he's more of just a defeated character.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny. Speaking of tone, how do you guys feel about stories and shows that conflict tones? I always pick Batman and Superman when they combine those two.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I thought it was funny when a lot of people kept saying that the Batman versus Superman movie was too dark. And I'm like, well, of course it's dark. Batman's in it.
Yeah.
You're not going to have Batman hanging out in the daylight with Superman. No, and so it's like you either have to bring Superman to his world or bring Batman to his world. Either or. I mean, if that movie was lighthearted, all the Batman fans would have been like, no, it's not dark enough for Batman.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's too dark, then it's too dark for Superman.
Yeah.
It's like the two incompatible worlds trying to mix. I think in the comic book, they've mixed them somewhat here and there, but most of the time in the comic book, they usually stretch more towards Superman's world. They bring
Yeah.
Batman out of Gotham in the Superman's world, and I think in this one they tried to bring him a little more in the Batman's world. And the two are supposed to not mix; they're polar opposites. That's why I always thought it was funny when it's like it's so dark. I'm like, well, yeah, Batman's in it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, you're gonna have shadows and dark things.
Yeah.
But it was, and of course you have the brooding character of Batman. Batman's the ultimate brooding character. I mean, the funny thing is I never seen a character where I'm like, look, I've had deaths in the family, and I understand you're fighting crime, but dude, there's got to be something. Maybe.
Yeah, at some point.
It's like constant depression.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, do they have antidepressants or something in there?
Well, I don't know about for a movie, and I've often said in the past that, I don't like people to get introduced badly to characters that I really like. But I don't mind a character being taken out of stuff for a little while. Like, I don't mind if Superman goes dark for a while, because you're too happy, man.
Mm-hmm.
You're too happy. It's not even like you're living in reality. In the same turn, I think people like Batman could lighten up a little bit, and they could have some stories of him, maybe not going all the way back to the '60s TV show, but I mean,
a little more upbeat.
Holy
I mean,
Platt.
Like
that's
not only polar opposites, but the extremes of like those sort of like character. Superman's all optimism and light, and Batman's all dark and brooding. So I mean, these are extreme polar opposites. Even I'm using.
yeah.
I mean,
Well, how
it's
about
like,
we get? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I mentioned at the start of the subject, but Invincible, you have a very intentional clash of the two like umbrellas of tones. You have Mark and Adam Eve, who are, they're there to be heroes and they're going to help people in their own way and discover themselves and stuff. And meanwhile, Earth is under constant apocalyptic threat, and Mark's dad is is the forerunner of an alien invasion from the most oppressive alien galactic government there is.
And there was a funny tone that I mean, the thing I remember when reading events when I read it years ago was like, oh, this is happy. It was the epitome of the bright superhero story, and then they just tear skulls in half, and I'm like, okay, they're not messing around in this. And I think the show, I didn't think the show would tone it down, but they actually upped the ante on that.
Yeah, the show, I felt like it did it real well.
Yeah,
and that also got Run the Jewels to provide music, so I super into that.
Do you think, strangely enough, Invincible could work without the gore? Or do you think because of the gore it kind of makes that show?
I think the gore really sells the juxtaposition. Because, you have the bright primary colors and the traditional heroes. Like, I'm here because, it's my dream to help people in the lowest hour. And then, they just get split in twain.
And I think also to sell the Viltrumite, you have to have that absolute carnage. It's just absolute obliteration that these guys do.
Well, that's what really sells it. Like, Mark sells this, Mark's dad sells us the Viltrumite, says, like, we're here to liberate people, to bring them back to, like, their best selves and stuff. And like, oh, you do that through, like, global genocide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't agree with us, we just kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
do you think, strangely enough, talking about marketing and stuff, tone of marketing, what this subject's about, do you think Invincible does a good job marketing itself? Because I remember, because I read the comics, so I knew what was coming in the show. And so I knew when that scene at the end happened, I'm like, yeah, that's the books. But I know there's a lot of people like, what?
Yeah.
And so do you think sometimes the marketing was effective in that sort of shock value when people see it? It could actually, and it also could be beneficial to heating as well.
Yeah. I think the very intentional decision on the marketing, be like, it's a new superhero movie with this dude in bright spandex, and as a young kid coming into himself, and you're like, well, yes, but no. But for people who haven't been experienced with the work before, when they got into it, it's it's that intentional shock. If you're doing something dark, you can have shocking moments by design, but don't oversell it. So when you come in, like, we're going to almost overinflate the bright and primary colors and the color pop, and then when it gets to the dark moments, it's going to just absolutely break it for you. I think that's a very good. The show is very well rounded in how it balanced both of those. Whereas the other end, you have the let's say another Amazon show, The Expanse, which has
Love it.
Yeah, it has its bright moments and its family moments and all sort of stuff, but it's marketed very much on the darker tones and the conspiracy behind all of it. And their trailers are the definition of pensive, where it's the sub bass rumbling while people are talking in hushed tones. But it balances out well also with the funny moments and the more almost kind of heartwarming moments with the crew in their private hours.
Yeah, it's strange. I think I watched an episode or two of The Expanse. It didn't catch with me. Does it get darker? I mean, I don't know. Is it a slow burn of a show? Is it one of those you have to...
The first season's a slow burn. I mean, the books are saying it's a space opera, so it tries to encompass everything that could happen with living in space, but in a way.
I definitely agree with Tim. Like you have to get through the first season, but I'd say that you definitely have to get through the first 4 episodes, and then it starts kind of moving.
Yeah, if you like Altered Carbon or like detective, like science fiction detective stuff, that's kind of the tone of the first season, and then it turns into it gets deeper into conspiracy, and you start dealing also with aspects of war and
more into the political intrigue that goes on.
Yeah.
Strangely enough, did you read Eldritch Horror and Psychedelic? Have you ever seen the movie like Mandy or Black Rainbow, Tim?
Yes, have I seen Black Rainbow? I know I've seen Mandy, and that was, oh my gosh.
Black Rainbow's made by the same guy.
Okay, so I'll probably dig it then.
So, this is one of his first films, and you can find that, I think, the stream. He made Black Rainbow, Mandy, and there was a third movie he has made.
Okay,
Black Rainbow, like psychedelic, that is crazy. The other one that I saw that was actually pretty decent for horror was something called Come True, which I think is streaming on Hulu. I think it's streaming on Hulu, and that was a horror, but they had that sort of Silent Hill horror aspect to it that had an interesting. The ending, there was an ending that was, I don't know, if you watch it, be curious to talk to you about the ending, because I was kind of like, it was okay. But that's always happens with me. There's so many movies that start out really good, then they get to the ending, and I'm like,
I'm trying to remember the name of it, but there's one as a Netflix original, I think, but it we call it the Geometry Movie, but it's a horror movie where it's in a small town hospital and all the cultists have triangles on their face.
Oh yeah, I've seen that one. I know the one you're talking about. They get caught and they all start surrounding the Yes, I did see that one. I thought that one was pretty good. And they eventually start going through this elder creature or whatever.
Yeah, that one and like Event Horizon kind of like I love when Eldritch Horror is I like it when they combine physical, like visible body horror with the fact that like you can see and experience something that is like grotesque and whatever, but the thing that's actually causing it is so much worse and you'll never see it.
Yeah.
Strangely
enough, when it comes to tone, do you there's almost like, it's funny, there's tone like humorous or whatever, but there's also subtones, like even in horror.
Yeah.
You have more spooky and then more like slaughter or gore fest. Even in humor, more dry humor or like slapstick and stuff. It's kind of weird to break those down even further. I don't know. I mean, aren't we supposed to be talking about tone and marketing? Was that one of the things?
Kind of, or like the pros and cons of deciding tone, or like what would you think when you decided tone? I mean, obviously with like, I think we also kind of talked about this in the first hour, but obviously with like a lighter tone, you can't, get away with gorefest moments or things like that unless it's intentional. And in darker tone, if you overload it with humor, it's going to take away from the fact that what you're supposed to be experiencing. And so I think, we're not inclined to like a certain thing. So if that's what we want to write, then we have to exist within the tone. Because if we try to do something else, we're not going to have fun creating it, essentially.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I was thinking the same time. That do you think there's tones in marketing a company? This is
Oh
one
yeah.
of the I encounter. I've encountered before and talked about this. Like I had an old job that he's trying to sell his company, but his company it was like a motion graphics. He was kind of a jack of all trades,
Mm.
and he was, you know, I kept some people kept telling us like, well, you need to do more rate the like razor focus is sort of talking about like you find that one thing you're good at.
Yeah.
Like in Portland, we have Leica, which Leica is stop motion. That's their shtick. That's what they do. And usually companies have a shtick that can also and to go with the tone can
Mhm.
also be more marketing. Do you find sometimes that comic book companies because they try to market so many different titles with so many different genres kind of defeat themselves in marketing the company itself to a
Yeah.
specific audience?
I definitely say so. I mean, if you're in the big two or the big four, with Image and Dark Horse kind of dominating the non Marvel DC market, you kind of exist from just being in that company. You benefit from just like it's Marvel. What do you want? It's a comic book. But I mean, we look at some of the smaller presses. Oni's been around for a while. It's a local company for us, but
Yeah.
man, I
Yeah,
have
it has.
no idea what they do.
Yeah. It's one, and I think sometimes that's the one thing that hurts. And I'm not even
Yeah.
picking comic books. I think almost to a degree, there's book companies do this
Yeah,
too.
it
Too.
traditional publishing right now is in, and I'll include comics and traditional publishing is in like a drought in terms of good marketing, and has been for a couple of years. It feels like. I mean, the last
It's been more than a couple. Yeah.
the last thing I think I remember seeing marketed in terms of publishing was a James Patterson YouTube ad, and it probably wasn't even written by James Patterson. But I mean, even just like cost-effective forms of marketing, you're already going to be at a convention to get a freaking banner that isn't just a color scheme.
Yeah. It's weird because I remember like there's been a few comic companies that have done horror comics.
Mm-hmm.
Like even you look at like EC, which I
Yeah.
don't think EC is all horror comics, but that's what they're mostly remembered
Yeah.
for. But again, that sort of selling horror, or selling
Yeah.
sci-fi, you almost wonder. And it's weird. I've seen some comic company. Brian Pulido comes to mind when he started doing Evil Ernie and Lady Death. He was very much just horror
Mm-hmm.
idea theme that he sold. I think it was beneficial to that way. But sometimes I never can tell if the audience, in other words, for comic companies to survive, that they have to sell tons of titles in different genres and different themes and different tones to survive, or would it work better to limit the tone of what you're trying to sell to a specific audience, even though the audience could be very limited in their comic buying habit?
I mean, it's. I mean, comics are definitely in a weird place, but that's the
Yeah.
that's the big fish in a small pond versus small fish in a big pond dilemma.
Yeah.
Where like if you're trying to exist, like I mean, the nice thing about Silverline is we operate as a collective, so each writer has their own specialist, but their name is like it's Silverline. It's a lineup of comics loosely inspired by the Silver Age. It's like if you're reading comics in that period, you'll probably find something here. And our marketing mock-up is our roster. Like we have that art piece done. It's like every Silverline character. Like someone on a poster think is cool. Great, yeah, we have a book for it. Yeah, but
And I have to say, on the other hand, on the other side of that, when I go to Marvel,
Mhm.
I am not thinking sci-fi or horror, or
yeah,
I am thinking of heroes and their little universe they got going,
Mhm.
and that's it.
Yep.
Like if I want like sci-fi or Star Wars, I go to Dark Horse,
Yeah.
or somewhere else besides Marvel.
Yeah.
I don't really look at Marvel.
Yeah.
Whereas us, I like that we're building toward something that is everything.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like majority of publishing companies survive by publishing multiple genres. I mean, movie studios. I mean, Warner Brothers
Yeah.
publishing. So I'm not saying it's bad, but they start to what they'll do is they'll separate them. They'll razor off. Like Warner Brothers is like distributing movies,
Mhm.
but then they'll cut them down to certain this is a horror. Like I think for like a lot of horror movies, there's a production company called like Madhouse or
Yeah, they'll create like
well-
sub companies or like subsidiaries.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes when we start to figure out our tone, I mean, I could totally see in Silverline having a historical fiction
Yeah.
subset of like with your book, Steam Patriots, other ones that we could do, and I mean, the more history books we do, I actually thought like, man, if people do a lot of history, maybe that can kind of be
Yeah.
one of Silverline's niches.
Yeah, and I think also we exist in the same area as kind of like Image, where we exist to publish creators' work, not necessarily to push our own. So, like you'll follow a writer or an artist because you know that they work primarily on science fiction stuff, and they put out a lot through Silverline, or I mean, I've been trying to push. I haven't really tried to push, but I've had the idea just bumped around. Like, if we did like a black line where you can like, all right, here's Silverline X-rated, just where I can show the inside of someone's brain.
It's one of those things. I know there's a company called Action Lab that I've done some stuff for, and they did a good job of splitting. They did kids' books, and they actually split off like Action Lab comics is lighthearted, more like Saturday morning cartoon, kids' books, that stuff, and then they have Action Lab Danger Zone, which is a more adult stuff.
Yeah,
they've actually done a pretty good job of keeping the two separate.
I mean, there used to be more emphasis on the imprint system, where you had DC proper, which was Justice League and your main lineup, and then you had DC Vertigo, which was so did you fall on your head as a kid? You might like these. And Marvel also had their own things. That's how we got Malibu and Ultraverse. Was here's like super intense action-packed Marvel beyond what you may have been experienced.
Right.
Yeah, and
when the Ultimates were around, that was more your adult-themed hero stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that was Mark Miller playing in the Marvel Universe and being put on a leash until he was let off.
Yeah. Well, I think that's honestly that's for like main comic publishing. I almost see that as being the more thing where the power of a name now, especially in the age of social media, is going to be, I feel like, more impactful than the name of a publisher necessarily. So what they did with the X-Men right now, we're saying like, hey, this is all Hickman's X-Men or whatever. Or like, if you enjoy him, like all illustrators being now are being supervised by him. We're hands off. Same with Ultimates. There's kind of their friend. Like, if you like Miller, he's doing our alternate universe run right now. We're hands off. And so I think Marvel had Epic. True. Roland and YouTube. But I think kind of if you're existing outside the imprint system, I think that's going to be kind of a bigger thing because now everyone can look up whoever they want to. So if some company says like, hey, we're having this person manage this title or this set of titles right now, if you're into this, their theming, go check these things with their name on it. And so
Image kind of just did a free for all. I think Image just kind of publishes their tone.
Because Image came out as being, McFarlane and a bunch of other guys are saying like, we just want to allow creators to create what they want, and we'll help out in the marketing and the distribution.
I do notice it's a sort of a weird sci-fi fantasy, like it's weird as in weird sci-fi, weird fantasy type vibe that was going through Image. I don't know if it's still going through there. But there's a lot of
I know some weird fantasy, but I must say I actually go to Image for a lot of science fiction stuff. I like all the science fiction stuff that they pick up. Black Matter, Wyatt the Last Man. Oh man, I forgot the name of it. I'll come back to me at like 2 o'clock in the morning. But they did a kind of like cyberpunk Neo Tokyo thing.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. The one with the guy in the
on the motorcycle with the yeah.
I can't think of it. I know what you're talking about.
It's nearly 10 titles are vacating in my mind at this point.
It's like a Sean Murphy, I think, did the art in it.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and it was beautiful work. But in terms of marketing, I think because each person is like drawn to, they're making their own tone and stuff. So, if we got to a point where, like, if someone's like, hey, Aaron's doing all of, Cat and Mouse Black Run or whatever, and we're like, oh, I liked his style in Godlings, I'm going to go read that. I think that's kind of the more idea as opposed to, either we only do this, exist in like, offshoots of Silver Age spandex, or we do a little bit of everything without any discrimination. selling it by name, because each name carries its own tone, is going to be the way things go.
Yeah, because I can see selling by creator. Sometimes you have to let the person get to know the creator's work a little bit. There was but I mean, it's funny. I get, there's a company called TKO Comics that,
Yes.
for some odd reason, they do very different genres, but for some odd reason, visually, maybe they kind of have, and I'm not going to say the same tone. I think they visually look alike because of the design work.
Yeah, their packaging is very uniform, and they also have that really unique publishing style of, like, it's going to come out as 6 volumes. That's our comics come out as collected, like, runs at once.
Yeah. It's different. It's something that I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting way. Because I think comics has, I think all of them. I think it's just hard to market, in comics or whatever. Just you have to draw different genres to try to attract as many readers.
I'll say that's
you can.
Yeah. We do kind of do already interesting mix of that. I mean, with our Kickstarters and everything, we already kind of market by creator, because we have all of our people in, like, their list of credits, and saying, like, this isn't just, like, with Divinity, like, this wasn't just like, oh, it's another hero teenage adventure book. Like, it's a book by R.A. Jones and or Bob Kahlberg, who you've recognized from this, and R.A. Jones, who you recognize from this. But we then cross-pollinate that by putting it up next with Steam Patriots, which isn't necessarily, it'll share some similar tones. They both feature military characters and fantastical adventures, but it's not necessarily the same native audience.
I think we've developed a good job of creating a sort of design sense. I mean, when I look at the Silverline page on Indie Planet, where you can buy our books,
indieplanet.com/Silverline.
You can buy comic books over there. There is a sort of general theme. I mean, the art style theme, it's more lighthearted.
Yeah.
I would say a little more lighthearted, like Saturday morning cartoon stuff, which is a big draw for me. I like that stuff. That's why I like all that stuff. So I think that, and I think also the fact that we do the Silverline logo, the way we do it, I think is kind of, so I think that is working. It's weird, because the reason I bring this up is because they've been doing this with the Western comics versus manga. And this may do maybe not so much a tone or theme. Like they'll take a picture of the bookshelf, like Barnes and Noble or some graphic novel place, comic shop, and here's all the Western titles, and they're just like, you can't really tell what's what. Like, all the spines look different, all the words look different, and then you go to manga and it's like volume 1, 2, and they show like Naruto as an example. Like, all the spines of Naruto look the same. Yeah, and they look organized like a set. And I think some American comics do sets and stuff. But it's weird. I kind of see what they're talking about, and I don't know how to solve this. But, like, you look at manga, and it seems a little more organized, easier to pick out. But strange enough, I think one of the big things that defeats a little bit of Western comics in that is because since we usually do 4-issue graphic novels, that the spines are very thin. So sometimes you have so many different titles with such thin spines with different that it just looks kind of like a mess. Yeah. Sometimes, and I don't know how to resolve that. Invincible did a good job. If you look at the hardcover, they did a good job of letting it all go together. I mean, stuff.
I think it's really interesting. Is like they combined House of X and Powers of X into one trade. Yeah. So and you got that at the same time as you got Age of X, or not, right after Age of X, and then they did all the other things like right next to each other, like power. So it was all either like red, black, white, gold with the X in the center, and then titles flipped on both sides. But when you get into the street level after the major event run, then it's the thinner trades, and there is definitely something there where I feel like a lot of people got this because I was able to talk to a lot of people about House of X while this was the material, and now it's into its street run. Everyone's on to the next collected issue. Or the next... Yeah.
Do you, strange enough, think that this could be also an affecting of tone? I know this sounds weird, but if you design the look of how they see books on the shelf, that can affect the tone.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's... Yeah, I mean, because the cover artist and the graphic designer are also part of the creative team, and so working with Brad Thompt on the logo for Wolf Hunter.
Yeah.
I knew exactly the tone I wanted to go, and like if I went to volume 2, that'd be that tone. I doubled down on that tone, and so Roland and I had kind of different ideas, but knowing exactly what kind of tone I wanted, I gave him that idea, and he put the mock-up on a cover. I need to email him back, or Brad, if you're watching this, yes. But
Yes.
yes, but it covers the idea of like, you know, it's a war story, but it's almost like a war story told through case files. It's almost like
Okay.
yeah. And so they gave me the kind of idea like if each volume was able to like, you know, case number blah 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 blah, and then subtitles like the Magnetron incident or case number blah 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 London Bridge incident.
You could even design. I'm not even
Yeah.
part of it, but I keep seeing covers like maybe each cover of a comic is like the cover illustration could be a part of like a case file piece of paper on a table. You know, somebody puts a case file down on the table, it's got other paper.
Mhm.
Like you can have sort of uniform image of like this sort of case file, and then the main image of the case file for that book is on this page,
Yeah.
maybe a little.
It's yeah.
I mean, this is what I try to do with my Gaulians. I try to make each cover in the art is different.
Yeah.
But they're and I think I showed you, they're uniform. The borders and everything are uniform in the back. So one of my books will look like a complete set when
Yeah.
they're all. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's creating a tone.
Yeah.
That
So-
that's what I was kind of looking for.
When some people like when someone looks at Wolf Hunter, like it's investigative, but you know, you're seeing a dude with piano wire on the cover inside the investigation file, or you know, a Messerschmitt or a Hawker Hurricane or something. So like, oh, it's World War II. It's a little actiony, but it's the pensiveness is going to be the overall thing of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And so
think people, especially in comics, if you can find a series or something that looks like a set, like a complete set or matching set, collectors love that. I know as a collector,
Yes.
I love it.
yeah.
You know, I go back to like the Invincible books. They all look like they're part of a set.
Mhm.
The covers, the sort of the
Yeah.
design. I always like that. It looked good on my shelf.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's frick. Well, I kind of lost the name of the original one again, but with the James Tinian's Department of Truth, it also has that same the way it plays on modern myths and stuff like that. But all of its arts, all of its cover art is kind of done as like an abstract, almost like a some of it almost looks like a Renaissance painting, but it's abstract, some of it's stained glass looking. But it's all, you know, things you would have seen like the Lizard Men, the Woman in Red, Baba Yaga, all this other stuff that's all kind of put together.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that stuff. Cool. I don't know. I always like that. I think
Yeah.
comic issues don't you need. Yeah, I don't think you need to so much with comic issues. To a degree, same logo, different. You know, but I think graphic novels.
Now we get to
I
like, the
mean-
trades and the yeah.
Yeah, I think can sometimes sell graphic novels just so that idea. I don't know. And as collectors, when you look at your bookshelf and see, okay, here's all my, I have Conan. Like here's all my Dark Horse Conans, and they all
Yes.
look uniform. And and I guess that kind of creates a tone too, because I always think of like the spine and stuff. Like, could you tell the tone of a book by the spine sometimes? But I'm thinking that's
Sometimes,
like
yeah.
in book, the first thing people see is the spine.
Yeah.
Strangely enough, it could be the cover, but most people pick up a book based off the spine first.
Oh, yeah.
It's really weird to say that, but I think it's kind of true sometimes.
I'll go with the Sam Sykes book because I've already did Joe Abercrombie on stream. But Seven Blades in Black. And here's
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's a beautiful spine, and that's like or is it they got fantasy, there's a little bit of like religious tones, it's adventure, like it
I'll pick up that book
Yeah.
because I want to see the cover or
oh, yeah.
it just the idea on the spine. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, this could be also getting to the fact that most 4-issue graphic novels just don't create a big enough spine to warrant something that. But if you do a big enough book, you can do some really cool spines.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm always one of those people, and I'm looking through books. If a book has an interesting spine, I'll
Yeah.
pick it up and take a
I
look
think
at it.
also like why I think so I think yeah, well I think a really good graphic designer or letterer who's doing the lettering on that title, if they can do a really the title on the spine, if that can be as visually impactful as some really good art on a smaller space, that is what's going to get someone to pull it off. Is if the title, because if it's just like a generic title where it kind of looks like just kind of mush or a black metal band logo where it's just a bunch of veins put together. But if it's something like, oh, that's a fun title and it looks like they put a lot of time and it's interesting how they made the letters into a form of art, that'll be a little bit of encouragement to pull it out.
Yeah, strange enough, I have. It's funny. Maybe one of these podcasts we should talk about favorite comic book logos.
Yeah.
Because there's some even logos that I look at. Like I always really like the Battle Chasers logo.
Yeah.
I always thought that was a really cool the way he did that. Alien Legion, I think, also had kind of a cool logo. There were some cool logos where I'm like the way they kind of made the logo imparts a lot of the tone of the book.
Yeah.
Which I thought was cool.
Guys in there.
It's fun to go look at like, do I have other logos on here that?
I have my pile of comics, but it's underneath more of my pile of shame of stuff I need to put together and paint.
I don't know if I can be on the show anymore with you, man.
Yeah, it's getting bad. But yeah. So we've been talking about tone. Spent the first hour talking about kind of more the creative side of it, and this is more about like the receptive side, marketing side, what we think we like in each thing and why we do the way we do. And sometimes you just do it because we like it, because art is subjective. Yeah. And if you're not creating what you want to create and you're just following the dollars, it's probably going to be not fun for you making it, and people probably aren't going to like it.
Yeah. People can sense if you're not having fun in the project.
Oh yeah. Like, I mean, the Hobbit movies for Lord of the Rings, you can tell, like, oh, this was, like, made because they wanted to extend a 2-hour book by 6 hours and just dump a ton of CGI to it. It's just a D&D adventure, like, but you could have done a better one, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is I look at the Hobbit movies as more of, like, using a Hobbit as a basis to make a big dungeon.
And, I mean, apparently, Peter Jackson got pretty burned out actually making it. Ian McKellen was absolutely not having it by the midpoint. And I feel like a lot of people could tell kind of when people started almost phoning it in. Yeah. But so this has been our show for tonight with many a diatribe. Remember to check out DaytonaBeachComicConvention.com and History List and the History Camp America. We will be live. Well, we won't be live, but Silverline will be live tomorrow, and again Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, where they will talk about more things. And we will be back next week, Tuesday, 8 p.m. Pacific. Subject to be determined. We are still figuring out a name for the show officially. Right now, we are just a Silverline show on Tuesday.
Silverline show on Tuesday.
Silverline show on Tuesday.
Yeah.
There's just nothing else to it.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's Silverline show on Tuesday.
Yep. I mean, I almost feel like we should steal Alex's title and just call it like the Silverline Tuesday Leadlords or something like that.
Yeah. Hey, if you come up with a name and we pick it, you could win a new car. You could win Aaron's.
You don't want me.
It'll be a drawing of a car that Aaron will
It'll
mail
be new
to
to
you.
you. It'll be new to you.
I have a little Matchbox car, I guess I can
Right.
give. But,
we might
it's a real car, so I mean,
we might mail you a drawing of a Hot Wheel. All right. So we will catch you all next week. Until then, I lost. Oh no, I didn't lose my band. It's on my pocket knife. Hey, remember to make mine Silverline
Yeah, make mine Silverline.
in later days.